to bring you incredible insight with a reduced carbon footprint. Future Planet. Solutions.
To achieve, also in the programme, as Russia intensifies its assault on Ukraine's Donbass, President Zelensky says the region is completely destroyed. And 2 more cases of monkeypox. We're going to start with the words of the US president. So much of the future will be written in the Indo-Pacific. That's according to Joe Biden, who's just arrived in South Korea on the first stage of his visit to the region. American presidents have often talked about a semiconductor plant. There's worldwide competition for access to these at the moment. And Biden will also travel to Japan during his 6-day trip. Speaking at the Samsung factory, though, Biden said it was time for Seoul and Washington to...
Like Samsung, that are driven by responsible development of technology and innovation, will be critical to shaping the future in the direction of our 2 countries, the direction we both want to go. So this is the moment, in my view.
The agenda for Biden's trip, which comes as the US faces growing influence in the region, of course, from China. Now, the president is meeting South Korea's new leader, Yoon Suk-yeol, for the first time in person. Up for discussion for this part of the visit, North Korea. Pyongyang has abandoned its freeze on intercontinental ballistic missile testing, and the threat of nuclear testing looms too, all while the country deals with a COVID-19 outbreak. And of course, China's growing influence and the interests are very much aligned when it comes to North Korea. The testing program of North Korea appears to be ramping up. They will clearly come out with words saying that they stand side by side, etc. But what does that actually mean in practice?
Including its first ICBM test since 2017. And it's very likely that they're going to conduct additional tests and perhaps its 7th nuclear test sometime in the near future. So the Yoon administration wants to see greater. Washington is interested in ways to enhance the combined alliance defense posture in the region. So this is not only to pressure North Korea, but it's also intended to send a message to China saying that the overall visit to the region is meant to, again, demonstrate our presence and reinforce the message that the U.S. is a player in the Indo-Pacific, that despite the other crises that are going around the world, including what happened last year, I mean, not only do we have a strong, at least in the case of South Korea, a strong alliance, but there is significant trade between the 2 countries. And of course, South Korea is the 10th largest economy in the region. As Biden mentioned, there needs to be greater investment and other problems like supply chain resiliency.
Frank, great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Right, let's move to Ukraine now and get the latest there.
In the first war crimes trial in this conflict, it's the turn of the defence. Vadim Shishimarin, a 21-year-old Russian soldier, has admitted shooting dead a 61-year-old unarmed man. Nervous. More war crime trials will follow, but President Zelensky doesn't want to stop here. He again has accused occupying forces of genocide, deliberately trying to kill as many Ukrainians as Pansk region. The Ukrainians continue to defend and frustrate. Their extraordinary resistance is both down to their resolve and support from the West. The US has just signed off on the biggest package.
Go to Australia now and the election there. The final day of campaigning is now over, and in a few hours' time, the polls to vote for a new parliament and a new government will open. One party needs to win at least 76 of the 151 seats there to form
the leadership in a sort of a party room coup back in 2018. He won the 2019 election against all of the polls. And he's trying to do that again, really. He's trying to come from behind and win it on sort of in the sense that he has that sort of indefatigable air about him. he looks like a winner even when he's losing, and sometimes he just sort of brings it about. So I think there's a tendency for people looking at this election at the moment to be somewhat, even seasoned commentators, to be astonished, even though the polls have consistently shown the Labor opposition, led by Anthony Albanese, to be ahead. Now, whether he's ahead enough, that is Labor's Albanese ahead enough to make those 76 seats in the House of Reps, that's the unknown. Labor's election at this stage.
Interesting stuff. And of course, the background to Australian politics is it's quite used to a bit of turmoil and lots of changing personnel.
Well, it did sort of attract that that somewhat Liberal National Party coalition, which said it wouldn't do it, has cycled through 3 prime ministers: Tony Abbott, then Malcolm Turnbull, and finally Scott Morrison. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster, but both sides seem to have stabilised over the last on day one of the campaign, and has never really looked particularly comfortable in campaign mode. Whereas Morrison, although trailing, has taken to campaigning, as he did in 2019, like it's his favourite thing. In fact, the joke going round is that
the Oscar-winning composer of some of the most famous film soundtracks, Vangelis, has died at the age of 79.
Need your...
Welcome back. This is Impact on BBC World News. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. Next, more cases of monkeypox have been reported across the world, with 2 new cases in Australia from travel.
Outside of countries which usually have this virus as an endemic virus, that's usually in West Africa and Central Africa. But nevertheless, it is notable that many of these cases didn't have travel links to intact, unlike COVID. And the other thing to mention is that there is an effective vaccine. It's actually the smallpox vaccine, which is related to monkeypox, but that can be used both to prevent it for vulnerable groups and also to treat it. It could just be that they've put the shout out to sexual health networks. It's not necessarily that those groups are at any higher risk. We'll have to wait and find out a little bit more as the cases climb.
Thanks to Naomi for that.
Britain's chosen destination for migrants, but not their destination of choice. This is Rouge by Desir, one of the hotels in Kigali that's to be leased for migrants. Jackie Uwamungu, the operations manager,
took place in 1994. But since then, the country has enjoyed steady economic growth, and there has been some benefits to the people. But there are serious concerns about the country's human rights record.
Rwanda is a country.
Indices that talk about how safe Rwanda is. We have made tremendous progress in the last 28 years. Rwandans trust their government. We have people who come to live here of their own. We consider ourselves a country.
Underground. 26-year-old Zemen Fesaha will soon join them. He says he was imprisoned, endured torture, and survived a shipwreck trying to get a better life. Now, he's close to achieving his goal.
I will be partner in Africa, I don't know. I'm not so sure.
Like most migrants, it's to go to a Western country. Rwanda is not where they hope to settle. And that raises questions about the UK deal.
Oscar for the soundtrack in 1981 and wrote music for many other films, including Blade Runner. David Silito looks back at his life.
A soundtrack that was both an Oscar winner and a #1 single. The work of Evangelos Odysseas Papathanasiou, better known as Vangelis. He'd started playing piano when he was 4, and in the 6 life of writing commercial hits for a band was not what he wanted. In his studio in London, he spent hours alone, exploring the possibilities of an emerging new musical technique. Bass. Movies such as Blade Runner. It was a vision of a distant future, Los Angeles 2019, and it needed the sound of the future.
My interest in it was not to create a symphony orchestra, which I can, it's very easy, but to go further than that and do things that the symphony orchestra can't do.
In the studio, you could hear something of the life of Vangelis in his music.
Car ever sold. It's one of only 2 Mercedes-Benz 300 Uhlenhaut coupes ever built. It was bought by an unnamed private collector, and the money is being donated to charity. That 143 million.
Still showers to come across northeastern states such as Assam in India, so it remains wet here, not as wet as it has been. In fact, some of the wetter weather's further south towards Myanmar, Bhutan, into Thailand. This is a tropical depression here, a slow-moving one, continues wet. The monsoon southern and western states into Sri Lanka through the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and through Myanmar. And then still, all not as intense as it has been up towards Assam and the northeast states, it's still a very showery-looking picture, actually, for the coming few days. So you can see those showers around in Dakar, for example.
Almond butter.
And it's interesting with Russia, when you live in a time when people cannot tell.
Avoid us, but will answer. They can kill us, and they will also die. I can't understand for what.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
Without fossil fuels that is so politically toxic here. Join me, Shaima Khalil, on BBC World News.
As Cuba's economic crisis shows no signs of letting up, many see leaving as their only option.
Here on BBC World News.
And it's been the final day of campaigning before Australians go to the polls to vote for a new parliament and a new government. On Saturday, voters will choose between incumbent Scott Morrison or his rival Labour leader Anthony Albanese.
Cost of living crisis. The IMF tells the BBC that governments should subsidise fuel and food for the poorest people. Increasing sharply as a result of the ongoing fallout from the COVID pandemic and the impact of the war in Ukraine. Part of the IMF's remit is to promote global economic stability. So my colleague Aaron Heselhurst asked the IMF's managing
falling into recession when they are in this most exposed category, haven't yet returned to pre-pandemic levels, highly dependent on trade, to be support provided in a very targeted manner, preferably by providing subsidies directly to people, and very importantly, to support the businesses that are
this year in much of the world. I mean, what are the consequences of that? I mean, we've already seen civil unrest in Sri Lanka. Could we see more of that elsewhere?
Oh, definitely, yes. Remember 2019, the year before the pandemic, it was the year of, and I think if we are to learn any lesson from 2019, it is to be much more humble about policy decisions and engage in but it is not distributed in a way that reaches everyone. So we advocate strongly for 3 avenues of action. Number 1, trade needs to be retained to another. 2, we ought to focus more on agricultural productivity, not only because of the war, but because of climate change. And 3, there has to be increase in agricultural production in places where
from companies after its owner, Meta, announced new software for firms who want to get in touch with customers. Let's talk to our North American business correspondent, Samira Hussein, who's in New York. Samira, what kind of changes are they talking about?
Really a way for businesses to communicate with their customers. Now, this would be a paid service for businesses that use it. And in terms of, just how much money they'll make off of it, it'll really depend on the pay scale. They said they're going to charge.
Where they have to make money out of it? Very briefly, if you can.
Well, so far, it's the only way that they have been able to get it through. Remember that a few years ago, it tried to get advertising on WhatsApp, and there was such an uproar that one of the co-founders of WhatsApp.
Reports from Sydney.
This is like $10 a kilo, so you're looking at $21.
Australians head to the polls as the cost of living soars to a 21-year high.
With the inflation, actually, we do need the government to get that under control. It's just
Forces. Opinion is divided about what governments can do.
It's in their hands because they know the economic factors, everything, so they know how to handle the situation.
No, I don't think anybody can do anything. Even if they change the government, I don't think anything.
Government. Both major parties here are trying to reassure voters that they are responsible economic managers. Businesses say one of the key tasks for a government is to instill confidence. There is a lot.
Politicians can overstate their influence over the economy.
The government is always worrying about the political cycle. Then when do they have time to sort of knuckle down and really get things done? I think, there is a bit of...
Comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
In our connected world, all news is international. So, for in-depth analysis, what's really going on?
BBC World News America.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine continues, and so do the attacks on the south and east of the country.
This attack happened while the Secretary-General of the United Nations was in
the facts, and that's where experience counts. And having a global view gives you another perspective. I love the pressure of being live. I feel like we're doing a job that matters.
Jason Tatum made it look oh so easy strongly at last month's Masters to finish second there, but as has often been the case, he's made slow starts at majors, but not at the Southern Hills Country Club in his first round, a 5 under par round of 65. Was playing alongside him as well. Tiger Woods, 15-time major winner, made a strong start to move to 2 under, but then he slumped badly. He could struggle to make the cut now. He's going to resume his round on 4 over par.
I had a lot of good iron shots. I drove it well, but my iron shots were not very good. I didn't get the ball very close. I got off to a great start and didn't keep it going, and I really didn't get myself any looks for birdie. It was. A
few that have teed off. McIlroy doesn't get going for another 4 or 5 hours. So you can see he's still top of the leaderboard, a single stroke ahead of Zalatoris and Hoagie. But look at that, a good start from Justin Thomas, the 2017 champion.
I would have said, come in with us. We might not have wanted that, but come in with us. I know our managers feel, so I didn't get that. And of course, he's running across a pitch of 80 yards across a lot of our fans running on. So it's not easy, but you know what? There's nothing from me. Not that I know that there were any
last night, and I don't really want that to tarnish the general consensus of what was going on last night. But it was just, I can understand why people would get worried and things like that, but as a
lot of people would do it, it's very difficult when you're caught up in the heat of the moment to not do something that it's almost a calling, to go to Goodison and to be on the hallowed green.
Well, we've heard from a few Premier League managers today ahead of the final day of the season on.
I'm not sure if it's a nice picture, but it's just like it is, and we should make sure that nothing, absolutely nothing, happens. People threaten themselves by jumping over whatever, these kind of things. It's just so that these kind of things shouldn't happen. I think we can celebrate things with.
1 year in charge, they finished second in the Bundesliga, 8 points adrift of the champions Bayern Munich. Dortmund failed to get beyond the group stages of the Champions League. They were then knocked out of the Europa League by the eventual finalists Rangers. Club also suffered a 87. It was very much a team effort. Between them, Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart scored 75 points. As the Heat struggled to make a game of it, Boston will hope to take that momentum into Game 3 at home on.
When you make mistakes, they make you pay for it, and you got to limit those mistakes. And that's that was my mindset. Come in.
I was proud of the way that we responded. Last game was tough. Just kind of how we lost, and
where the Red Sox came from behind to beat the Seattle Mariners 12-6. This game was all about Trevor Story, who hit 3 home runs, including this 3-run homer in the 8th. Boston finally getting a return on their investment. They paid 100 Carlos Sainz. Better news for Mercedes, 4th fastest, but it was George Russell, not the 7-time champion Lewis Hamilton, down in 6th. He was a second slower than Leclerc. You can keep on top of all the Formula One news.
It's a cold wind that's blowing in New Zealand. Further north in China, we've got some hot weather here. Further south across the country, it's cooler in the rain, although Hong Kong may stay dry. We've got some wet weather to come around Connecticut into Kerala, further north, around dry and sunny for large parts of South America. That very wet weather much further north. And we've got this wet weather moving down towards the Great Lakes. A lot of heat in the southeast, but much, much colder in the northwest of North America.
Most spacious and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
I'm very interested in the connection between people.
Fluid, dynamic, androgynous, he's now at the forefront of a new generation of progressive choreographers who are drawing new audiences to contemporary dance.
It is just extraordinary, whatever their method.
The Travel Show, sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
So the idea was really to create a space where young and old come together and where grandmas and grandpas can bake their homemade recipes.
We're a public living room, and as you see, different cakes. We have chocolate, we have Apfelstrudel, we have Kardinalschnitte, everything. And everything is fresh, everything is homemade, and it's kind of the core and the heart of the Vollpension.
I have been here for such a long time, so it's all kind of a family.
My name is Marianne and I live in Vienna. I am 77 years old and I live in this flat since 48 years. I must say to old people, please go out, can work in full.
Great idea to communicate with them.
We've heard that they really have old recipes from the grandmothers.
With secret ingredients.
Yes, yes, yes. We are very excited.
The pandemic and putting it online. So we built an online baking academy where you can learn baking from a grandmother, either through on-demand videos or via live baking courses. So we even kind of went international. We invited grandmothers and grandfathers from all over the world to join us with their baking knowledge. Right now we're about 35 elderly people working for us. They're like a bit isolated. They have so much to give and they just need a place where they can express it.
The Travel Show, sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
inflection point in history where the decisions we make today will have far-reaching impacts on the world we leave to our children tomorrow.
We'll look at what President Biden's visit aims to achieve. Also in the programme. Hello, welcome to the programme. We're going to start with the words of the US competition, of course, at the moment for access to these components. And Biden will also travel to Japan during his 6-day trip. And speaking at the Samsung factory, Biden said it was time for Seoul and Washington to invest in each other.
So much want to go. So this is the moment, in my view, to invest in one another, to deepen our business ties, to bring our people even closer together.
Right, let's take a quick look at the agenda for Mr. Biden's visit. This part of the visit, especially as North Korea, Pyongyang has abandoned its freeze on intercontinental ballistic missile testing, and the threat of nuclear testing looms, all while the country deals with a COVID-19 outbreak. And of course, China's growing influence will drive what the two leaders are likely to discuss when it comes to assessing the threat from North Korea.
On a policy level, the top concern is how to strengthen deterrence against North Korea. North Korea has been conducting numerous force and resolve with the alliance. This could potentially mean more B-52 bomber missions from Guam to the Korean Peninsula, or a greater presence of the U.S. carrier strike groups in the region. I think South Korea will also likely this is not only to pressure North Korea, but it's also intended to send a message to China saying that if China doesn't do more to rein in North Korea's bad behavior, then it will start to see things that are adverse to its interests. Things like the THAAD missile.
Do you think this visit, and how do you think it will be received in Beijing?
Well, I think the overall visit to the region is meant to, again, demonstrate our presence and reinforce the message that the U.S. is in the region, as well as strengthening alliances and partnerships to improve our goals for Indo-Pacific strategy.
And how much do those relationships, those partnerships, effectively come down to
between both countries? We've already seen that last year as South Korea invested in U.S. industries related to electric vehicle batteries, semiconductors, and vaccines. So I think there's going to be more and more
of the first Russian soldier to be accused of war crimes in Ukraine is continuing in Kyiv. The lawyer acting for 21-year-old Vadim Shishimarin, who has admitted shooting an unarmed civilian, says he is not guilty of a premeditated.
Soldier has admitted shooting dead a 61-year-old unarmed man. His lawyer argues it shouldn't be a war crime as he was following orders and feared for his life. The prosecution says he could have just scared the civilian off instead of firing for that region. It's now Russia's priority. Moscow's always denied genocide, but sees it as its own. It's where the fighting is most concentrated, in towns like Severodonetsk, where they defend and frustrate. Their extraordinary resistance is both down to their resolve and support from the West. The US has just signed off on the biggest package yet, $32 billion. To a fate which could include a war crimes trial of Russia's own. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Kyiv.
OK, we're going to go to Australia now and the election there. The final day of campaigning is over in a few hours.
Well, the polls are suggesting that Labor has probably the upper hand. That is the Labor opposition. Of course, the government of Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, for a bit over one term now. He was elevated to the leadership in a sort of a party to Scott Morrison in the sense that he has that sort of indefatigable air about him. He looks like a winner even when he's losing, and sometimes he just sort of brings it about. So I think there's a tendency for people looking at this election at the moment to be somewhat even see that's the unknown, whether Scott Morrison can either survive with his own majority intact or perhaps just lose a few seats and then convince some of the crossbench MPs, the independents, to give him confidence and supply. These have, such as it is, which is a lot of polling, suggests that it is Labor's election at this stage.
Interesting stuff. And of course, the background to Australian politics is it's quite used to a bit of turmoil and lots of changing personnel.
Referred to as the Italy of the Southern Hemisphere because of the sheer number of changes that occurred. Most of these changes didn't result in changes of government. They just resulted in changes of Prime Minister because of party room rebellions. Both of a roller coaster, but both sides seem to have stabilised over the last term of government. They've both instituted internal rules in their parties to make it harder to knock over incumbent leaders.
Thanks to Mark Kenny for speaking to me just a little earlier.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable.
One person can cause an effect. One person in HR can challenge outdated hiring practices, champion modern benefits, advocate for pay equity, and turn jobs into careers. HR empowers others to not only dream of change, but to create it. The actions of a few affect the lives of many. Join SHRM's global HR community to make monumental impact and cause the effect you wish to see in the workplace today.
From travellers who recently returned from Europe, and several cases also found across North America and Canada. The UK has a total of 9 cases, while Portugal has 5 and Spain has identified 7. Well, our global
Central Africa, but nevertheless it is notable that many of these cases didn't have travel links to places like DRC or Nigeria, so that's why health authorities are a little bit worried, because it does suggest that community and the USA, and obviously at the back of everyone's mind is, has this virus somehow mutated to become more transmissible? 2 things to stress. First of all, as I mentioned, it's mild. Also, it's not that easy to contract.
It's spreading, and why now?
Not really. Cases have been going up in countries like the DRC over the last few years. Interestingly, the UK cases have been picked up predominantly in the gay and bisexual community, but that
symptoms and 2 more deaths as it fights its first confirmed coronavirus outbreak. It takes the number of cases to more than 2 million. Just a week after the first infection was reported, 65 people have died so far. To Argentina, against indigenous communities across Latin America. Migrants in northern France have expressed fear over the UK's plan to transfer some newly arrived migrants to Rwanda, but most say they're still committed.
Bunkers once used by German soldiers, now patrolled by French police. People smugglers use these bunkers to hide passengers before channel crossings. These sprawling beaches have always been hard.
They said, and once you're in British waters, the British Coast Guard will take you to shore. But the government's new policy means that those crossing this channel now could end up in Rwanda, not the UK.
All is afraid now they are not afraid, we must go to the UK.
Some aid workers say migrants are waiting to see whether the UK follows through on its plans.
The uncertainty regarding once they will reach UK.
More than 600 people crossed this water last weekend. More have followed since then. It's early days, but for most migrants here, ready to gamble their lives to reach the UK.
Suffered after a previous demonstration flight back in 2019 went wrong. Well, our science correspondent, Jonathan Amos, says today's launch has so far been a success.
This is going very well, and so much better than the last industry. So they want to do it properly this time, and they're going step by step, and everything looks to be okay.
Boeing is behind effectively here, isn't it? Because this is it's not the only private company.
Doubt it was going to buy rides in other people's vehicles. And so they gave some seed money to Boeing and to SpaceX. And SpaceX have gone on to develop a very successful system. You'll know that, the Falcon rocket and the Dragon capsule, they are now astronauts and bringing them back down. Boeing, you know, they were neck and neck for quite a while, and then they encountered this issue the last time in 2019. So they haven't even got to the stage yet of carrying astronauts. But if they can make it through the next...
Thanks to Jonathan for that. Now, royalty and celebrities turned out on Thursday night for the UK premiere of the long-awaited Top Gun sequel. It's been 36 years since we first saw Tom Cruise on the silver screen as Maverick. Now the Hollywood...
Coming up with a checklist for your dream film premiere, you've probably got Hollywood royalty, actual royalty, up-and-coming stars, a big crowd, and something unexpected, like a fighter jet, on the list. So safe to say...
The past, they can save cinema's future.
I'm always thinking about the big screen and that experience. So, and I know audiences want it. And so it's beautiful that I think everyone is...
Dose of nostalgia with some new, yet familiar faces.
I was definitely aware of, you know, the fact that it's a beloved movie and the fans have a lot of expectations, so it was definitely on my mind.
The last few.
Right, that's it from me. Thanks for your company. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. This is Impact on BBC World News. Bye-bye.
States of India, where temperatures are still getting up into the high 40s, so it's hot by day. It's been relentless and hot by night over the last couple of months, in fact. Now, further north still, it's cooling somewhat. We've got some rains coming in, as you can see, and that'll behind it bring somewhat cooler. So you can see those showers around in Dakar, for example, and certainly in Colombo, with those monsoon rains having arrived here, at least now on that southwesterly. But the heat just dipping away a little bit for New Delhi, but it stays hot.
At 70 years, Elecon
manufacturers in Asia with a pan-India and global network. We continue to get a step closer to our customers.
That's Elecon at 70. Elecon, celebrating 70 years of excellence.
I'm Jonah Fisher, and I had a front row seat to Zelensky's incredible journey. Zelensky, the making of a president, is on BBC World News.
Crowned champions, but
This is BBC World News, the headlines. Joe Biden has arrived in South Korea to meet the accused Russia of brutal and meaningless violence in Donbass, as Moscow claims it is nearing full control of the breakaway Luhansk region. The British government says it's informed more migrants that it plans to send them to over the month. And it's been the final day of campaigning before Australians go to the polls to vote for a new parliament and a new government. This is BBC News.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. The United States is a secular republic. There is no state religion. But many Americans have nonetheless come to see their country as a deepening America's divisions.
This earth to take our sins. He didn't come to condemn us, he came to save us. And this is a message that we preach to every generation.
Why are you so convinced that you are living through an era of protected? Well, I do want to get into your views on the abortion issue and how that fits with the American public's view on abortion in just a moment. But just to stick with the overview of you as a preacher, you say it is your duty to preach the word of God. Is it?
For God's truth and for what he says in his word. I believe the Bible, Stephen, to be God's word from cover to cover. I don't understand it all, but I certainly believe it all.
The literal truth.
But I believe
cover
it
to
all.
cover, the literal truth. Every word of it true.
Absolutely, no question. That's what I believe. Been very successful at that, and we see this throughout Western society.
So yours is, I mean, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but yours is a message of fear, right?
No, it's a message of truth, Stephen. I want people to know the truth.
Losing support, losing affiliation.
I don't think I'm losing support. The church in decline would be mainstream churches that have turned their back on the Word of God and have compromised.
Well, to be absolutely fair, looking at...
I don't agree that's in steep decline. I think because of the pandemic for the last couple of years, those numbers have been skewed because churches were closed. People quit going to church. But here's the thing: during the pandemic, the financial giving to the churches went up.
Also about demographics, again, according to the same data analysis, the aging of the white evangelical population is extremely pronounced. While 22% of Americans 65 and over describe themselves as evangelicals, there's a decline of being scared and fearful of what Satan might be doing to the country. Is this a message young people really want to hear?
Well, again, Stephen, it's truth. I'm trying to just share with people what God sees and what God says.
He decided that was not conducive to winning hearts and minds. You've taken a very different decision.
Well, I
Why?
would disagree. He was friends with, I think it was 13 presidents.
Well, he was particularly friends with Richard Nixon, and he came to regret that. He talked publicly about how...
With all of them all the way up to Trump.
Well, I'm quoting his own words here. He said, if I get onto these other political subjects, it divides the audience on issues that I'm not promoting. This is in 2005, he said. I just focus on...
Me to campaign for him, I wouldn't do it. He asked me for an endorsement, I didn't do it. But when he became president, he was now our president, and I supported him wherever I could.
After the election in 2016, you said, I believe...
And I went to all 50 state capitals in 2016, and we had prayer rallies on the steps of the state capitals. Nobody's ever done that before. And I saw the turnout of people that came to pray. They didn't come to pray for Trump. They did, yes.
You haven't changed your mind at all?
No.
See, it's interesting, going back to Billy, your dad, and his decision to tread carefully in politics, it's interesting that even current members of your own family think that you got far too close, but all he stood for and came to earth to fight against. That's your own niece.
Well, she has her opinions.
How upset were you that even within the family there is clearly a disquiet about your alliance with Donald Trump? You already alluded to abortion being absolutely front and center of what you see to be a symbol of the moral decline in America. Are you determined, as America stands on the brink of a new fight, it seems, about abortion, because we've seen the leaks?
The United States looks as though they're going to overturn. They're not going to overturn Roe versus Wade as it was 49 years ago. What it does, it goes back to the states, and now the states can make those decisions.
Yeah.
So,
and we know that 20 and more states are absolutely I just have to push you a little bit on this because it's not altogether simple. Are you saying that abortion is murder even if the woman conceived as the result of rape?
That's a very difficult question, Steve. I'm not God. I can't answer.
Yeah, but God isn't going to play a role in this. It's human beings who are going to settle this.
No, God's going to settle it one day. We'll have to stand before Him and give an account. But I do believe that abortion is murder. That
in all cases, that's such a bold blanket statement. Imagine a woman who is told that she will die if she gives birth.
And I think those are decisions that should be made by the medical community, and they should have an opportunity to make those decisions. I'm not saying you don't take those decisions away, but I just believe that using abortion for birth control is
it sort of is. I mean, your message is very clear. I believe abortion is murder, and you know that those sorts of quotes that you give will be used by conservative anti-abortion politicians up and down the country.
I answer questions from reporters like yourself, and I want to answer.
Taleng Mofokeng. The quote is this: morality, which you've just acknowledged, and theological reasoning should not be allowed to undermine fundamental human rights. And the right of a woman to control
the child.
See, you're a man, and you're essentially saying to me that you don't acknowledge that a woman has right to control, a pregnant woman has right to control of her body, even in the first trimester of a pregnancy. Do you feel entirely comfortable?
Right, I'm not a politician. And that's something they will have to decide.
And what about criminalising certain forms of contraception and even IVF treatments? Where do you stand on that? Because according to you, this is all a moral issue, and you are
that alters God's plan for life. I believe is no question. I believe is the work of evil, and to take marriage and to define it as something separate of what God designed as marriage between a man and a woman, I think is wrong.
We have our own reasons that make us sinners, but just to say to all gay people, by definition, because you're gay, you are a sinner. I just wonder if you have any empathy for the gay people watching and listening to this who might feel same-sex relations.
No question, it's wrong, and lying is a sin. Stealing is a sin. Pride is a sin. All of us have broken God's standards and His laws, and the entire human race is under a death sentence from God's future. You and me, and if we're willing to repent and turn from those sins, and by faith believe on the name of His Son Jesus Christ, God will forgive our sins.
But this is my message. Isn't empathy a core Christian? Are any of them gay?
No.
Do you think they would dare tell you if they were?
Probably. I love my family, and we're honest with one another. But no question, all of my family, I would warn Christ and turn our back on what He's done. We have to stand before God and give an account for our life.
I talk about Christian values, and there is no question that you, with your Samaritan's Purse charitable organization, have done some amazing and wonderful humanitarian work, not just in the United States.
For hospitals and clinics across the country, and we just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
But this is about doctors.
Yeah,
what does it matter what doctors think about the validity of gay marriage?
It's having a team of people that is united.
An appalling track record of homophobic and Islamophobic views has come to Liverpool is an understatement. He is furious that you're in his city. How do you feel about that?
Well, first of all, I did not push against Muslim people, never brought them up.
So have you toned down the Franklin Graham message?
I've never been on that message.
Well, but we've just discussed a whole heap of quotations from you in the past where you were very definitely on that
answering questions
message.
of people like yourself. But
theory, you hit those buttons which social conservatives like to hit in the United States. But I just wonder whether you think social media is helping you and your message today.
I think so.
Because there's an awful lot of disinformation and
I'm not peddling conspiracy theories.
No, I'm not suggesting you are, but for example, QAnon theories were heard coming from the mouths of members of congregations. We know the QAnon theories, which some on the far right in America have peddled.
Right, there's always people out there. And yes, those things worry me very much.
Just a final thought, and it comes back to something we discussed early on. Do you think it is important that yours is perceived to be a message that is...
In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, God will forgive our sins. That's hope, knowing that we can have eternal life, that we can be forgiven by putting our faith and trust in Jesus Christ. It's not by giving money. It's not by any works that you do.
Warm memories wherever you go.
Across many parts of South Africa, that rain heading its way eastwards. Some hot weather in the northwest of Africa. Heat is building this weekend across Iberia into the Alps and across France. Some chillier weather in the far north of Europe. Quite cool for the time of year in southern parts of in the southeast, but much, much colder in the northwest of North America.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The sense that the danger, the conflict is coming closer, and a feeling here now that nowhere is safe.
In the city of Quetta in western Pakistan,
Hazara women are calling for an end to violence.
We're standing at an inflection point in history.
Russian forces intensify their offensive in Donbass and gain some ground. President Zelensky says conditions there are hell. The World Health Organization is to convene to a bid to counter the growing influence of China, and this by President underscores that priority. His first stop was a set to plant.
Military capabilities are sizable. And I think with South Korea's willingness to join the Indo-Pacific countries and to become more of an active regional player, that does give some weight, or that does bear some weight to the crisis. Is also going to be mentioned. There's an upcoming NATO summit next month, and South Korea and Japan have both been invited, and I think they're weighing whether they should go ahead and attend those summit meetings as well, too. But certainly South Korea does have capabilities, and they...
What does the US visit mean for him and his leadership?
Yes, this is only 11 days out from its inauguration, but I think President Biden wants to emphasize that South Korea is now part of this fold, relationship with the US. I think the Biden administration is recognizing this and wants to recognize this. And so this trip and this summit meeting with President Yoon Suk-yeol highlights this fact.
Andrew, you're very good to get a meditated war crime. James Waterhouse reports.
In the first war crimes trial in this conflict, it's the turn of the defence. Vadim Shishimarin, a 21-year-old Russian soldier, has admitted shooting dead. I sincerely repent. At that moment, I was very nervous.
More war crime trials will follow, but President Zelensky doesn't want to stop here. He again has accused occupying forces of genocide.
Their resolve and support from the West. The US has just signed off on the biggest package yet, £32 billion, military, humanitarian and economic help.
The future of American security and core...
Pole is finally lost. Almost 2,000 fighters are thought to have surrendered so far, to a fate which could include a war crimes trial of Russia's own. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Kiev.
More cases of monkeypox. Noticeable bumps and lesions on the skin. People have referred to it as almost being like an extreme form of chickenpox. It's usually mild in most cases, but it can be serious. It doesn't spread that. There is an effective vaccine. The vaccine actually against smallpox works against monkeypox, so that's good news too. But obviously what's slightly worrying here is that we're now seeing cases cropping up in countries that don't normally have a monkeypox problem and actually can be treated in its early stages with that vaccine that I talked about. And that's why countries like the UK are working on procuring more vaccine. Now, as to how worried should we be? Well, the main thing is that it's caught early for more cases to come forward if they believe they've got it. It's not just bumps and lesions on the skin, though. It's also sort of flu-like symptoms, also swollen lymph nodes, and some cases are seeing sort of, well, I think we've seen that already. Sajid Javid, the health secretary here, said he was talking to health ministers who he was coincidentally meeting today in Berlin. Also, you mentioned earlier that the WHO is having meetings about...
Here on BBC World News, still to come. We visit the facilities in Rwanda that will soon house migrants trying to enter the UK. The first group are expected to arrive at the end of this month.
ये मेरा चीज है।
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine.
As US president, he's aiming to strengthen ties with America's regional allies. Russian forces intensify their offensive in Donbass and gain some ground. President Zelensky says conditions there are hell. Today, the Islamists ordered all women TV journalists to cover their faces, but most women anchors on main channels have presented showing their faces. I'm joined now by BBC journalist Ali Hamadani, who has been following this story for...
meant that the women should wear the traditional burqa, but they have not done that. Instead, they came up with creative ideas around this, which means they started wearing the mask, which they were in Afghanistan. And I have to say, it was always amazing to see how they are operating relatively free. 2 years ago in Afghanistan, people were watching the talent show The Voice with many female and male.
On the streets of Afghanistan, have or are going to defy this order to cover their faces?
Let's look at differently. So let's look at from this angle. First of all, after last August, many would hope that they see some fresh air, some freedom. And these female presenters on air basically were relatively trying to operate as normal. So that's why the Taliban, when they say many people seem as if they are going to follow that order.
Yes. Thank you, Ali Hamadani. Thank you for your insights there. The British government says it has informed more migrants this week that it plans to send them to Rwanda as it seeks to deter people of this month. Our senior Africa correspondent Anne Soy has been to see some of the facilities being prepared to house migrants in Kigali.
And we've got a swimming pool, a conference hall, a Arabia restaurant. So this is one of the rooms.
Britain tells in Kigali that's to be leased for migrants. Jackie Uwamungu, the operations manager, doesn't know much about the deal, but she says they'll be ready when it takes effect.
So will you still be able to do all that when you start hosting? They know Rwanda as a place where a genocide took place in 1994. But since then, the country has enjoyed steady economic growth, and there has been some benefits to the people, but there are serious concerns about the country's human.
There's nothing wrong with Rwandan human right record, no matter what these external organizations say. We also have surveys and indices that talk about how safe Rwanda is.
90-minute drive south of Kigali. It's run by the UN Refugee Agency. Close to 1,000 migrants, mostly from the Horn of Africa, were brought here from Libya. The majority have been resettled in Europe or North America. 26-year-old Zemen Fesaha will soon join them. He says he was imprisoned, endured torture, and survived a shipwreck trying to get a better life. Now, he's close to achieving his goal.
I will go to Canada. Just as I told you, I want to go to Canada. But in Africa, I don't know. I'm not so sure.
Like most migrants, it's to go to a Western country. Rwanda is not where they hope to settle,
You and your team work on the front line directly with asylum seekers. Give us a sense of the conversations and concerns that they've shared with you about this policy.
People are very concerned. Some are terrified, people self-harming who are already incredibly distressed and have mental health problems. This has just made things worse for them. So many people we work with are extremely anxious and worried and very fearful about the post-centre Rwanda and about the fear that they have about what could happen to them when they're sent to Rwanda.
Counter to that, the government says this is their effort to counter irregular migration, to reduce the amount of asylum.
Act as a deterrent. It's not going to stop people from wanting to seek safety in the UK, from making very dangerous journeys, from being exploited by people smugglers. It's not going to achieve what the government wants to achieve. It's ill family members. But critically, the British government should actually be talking to the French government and doing a deal with them, not with the Rwandan government, and with our EU counterparts to look at how can we tackle this problem together, because it is a challenge.
It's one of only 2 Mercedes-Benz 300 all-in-out coupes that were ever built, and it was bought by an unnamed private collector, and the money is being donated to charity. Quite the buy. Plenty more on all of our news.
Wet here. And again, the heat is with us across Pakistan and northern states of India, where temperatures are still getting up into the high 40s. So it's hot by day. It's been relentless and hot by night over the last couple of months, in fact. Now, further north still, it's couply, and certainly in Colombo, with those monsoon rains having arrived here, at least now on that southwesterly. But the heat just dipping away a little bit for New Delhi, but it stays hot.
Was founded with a vision to always remain a step ahead. 70 years on, we remain leaps ahead.
From being one of the leading gear manufacturers in Asia with a pan-India and global network, we continue to get a step closer to our customers.
That's elegant
and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
And it's interesting with Russia, when you live in a...
They can kill us, and they will also die. I can't understand for what.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
Lively debate from Delhi on business, money and life. Now on BBC World News, Work Life India.
Namaste, I'm Devina Gupta and this is Work Life India on the BBC. Now it's been an for electricity and a shortfall in supply. And that's why there have been several power outages lasting long hours across the country, disrupting lives and work. So we're asking, what's behind India's power crisis?
Life without electricity is a struggle. Most are poor like Mahanand Dubey and cannot afford expensive power backup options like generators. So when there is no supply, he spends the night under the open sky. Expensive and unsustainable in the long run.
Power is like blood in our body. If there is no blood, no one can operate. So currently, if we are running our diesel generators, we are getting a blood transfusion, but it is costly.
You be factoring this cost to your clients?
Again. Now you start working after 5 minutes. Again the power cut goes. So, this cycle goes on and that's bad. So frequency is worse than actual power cut for, let's say, 5 hours.
And there are wider consequences. Many like her have invested in solar panels, but the electricity they produce is just not enough to meet their needs. And the power crisis is the last thing they need when they're trying to revive business after the crippling COVID lockdowns.
It's like, for now, you're getting a temporary relief from the power cuts that is happening back home.
Very true, but that's very temporary. I came here in the middle of April. I'll go back in the first week of June. So I'll again be time power cuts or power problems, scarcity will continue.
Okay, so at least 20 more days we have to brace for it, according to Partha. Let me get the other 2 guests in who are joining us from India's capital city, Delhi, where I am. Facing this real time, Manmohan Gain, Vice President Manesar Industries.
Not sleeping in the night because there's no power, so they don't come back to work fresh.
So there are multiple problems that we are facing right now.
Absolutely. And like one of the factory owners said, power is like blood. And if you don't have continuous power, it's difficult to still on energy, environment and water. Karthik, in the northern part of the country, where an orange alert has been issued recently, where the temperature breached 49 degrees in the capital. The moment you see temperatures peaking, you would also have demand for power peaking. So it's
reliant on captive consumption to consume from the grid. So are they sort of imposing an additional load? Is it entirely heat-driven consumption from residential consumers that's driving it? Are the distribution companies not able to control the demand from from the public at all in any
thermal power plants which rely on coal? And the government has said there is no coal shortage. In fact, the coal production has been 27% higher in April compared to last year. So what's actually leading to this power crisis?
I think basically met by the domestic coal to some extent. But it is not possible for domestic coal to meet the entire gap. So there is a problem for coal availability. But the bigger issue is possibly the unanticipated.
Similar kind of crisis in October last year. There were similar shortages for over 135 thermal plants that didn't have coal. Northern states faced long hours of power shortage. There was less than 4 days of coal supply that was available in October.
Because of the fact that Coal India had a huge stocks inventory, opening inventory, and they could draw down upon that inventory to supply more coal. So if the energy demand grows up by 20%, that is not an anticipated situation. So
just a few weeks ago, that there was less than a day's coal supply with the city. Who's responsible for anticipating this kind of crisis? Isn't there a system in place which can predict these kind of...
And there are numerous reasons. Partha sir is very well aware that how these coal companies are not paid, the Coal India is not paid, how the power generators are not paid. And all this has because the economic ecosystem of at the bare minimum. So there's a lot of issues involved here.
But Manmohan, that's a legacy issue, isn't it? We've seen power distribution companies are in deep financial debt. They're not able to pay to the power generation companies who don't have in turn money to buy more coal. This is a legacy issue. The point, central government was in a denial mode when they said there is no coal shortage. And now we do see them meeting power companies, trying to figure out where to transport coal from. This process have been expedited. This kind of crisis could have been avoided, especially
India either, right? Of course, in India, it's playing out in a big way. But, the state of Texas, for instance, in the US, is seeing similar outages in the summer, in the early summer that they're facing. They faced a similar issue, for instance, last year in the winter. So these issues happen in India. It is exacerbated primarily because we've not been, we've not institutionalized the practice of forecasting demand specifically based on meteorology and planning for it actively. And for the longest part, primarily because distribution companies have been, of course, the chain of events plays out as we've already talked about it. But at the core of it is the fact that we don't have it institutionalized, that we have to plan for electricity demand, not just for the next peak, but even for the next season. Which is why it's very important for us to look at what we're seeing right now.
Financial administration is certainly very grave. And the basic issue is that the states keep on announcing subsidies, they keep on announcing freebies, and they are not ready to compensate for that. That cannot go on. That cannot go on. If that goes on...
My only point is here, Manmohan, taking from what Partha has said, the power demand just in the month of April was about 207 gigawatts. So you have limited pool of power that is generated. On top of that, you have political parties which are promising free power as vote bank producer and consumer of coal as well. When you have decisions which involve, say, import of more coal, with the power ministry giving direction to all GenCos to import more coal, is it once again the paying customer that is going to suffer because cost of living will go up? Or is it also an unrealistic target?
So all our projections of what is going to be the coal demand for the rest of this decade today rests on the assumption that we get to this 450. Now, it's not an unrealistic target. It is something that we have to...
Noticed in the industrial area that I visited in Manesar was that many factories have a backup. So they have diesel gensets that they're using. There's also pollution because of which when they run diesel generator, which is adding to the environment. In fact, I was reading this.
100, 200 laborers that are working there, they lose the cost of those labor. They can't do that. The process itself is already started. You can't shut down a process in between. So you have no choice. Industry, this is that there should be a 5-year review of the prices at which the going forward, and some upcharge has to be given to people who have invested on the renewable at that time, at that cost.
Investment capacity to install, say, a solar power panel. So what is to be done for an immediate resolution? Let's talk now. I want electricity when I go back home. I want to have my cooling devices working. I want cold water. What is this?
If it's not, we need to prioritize that so that we can actually save some resources to support the poor who face the brunt of all these kinds of outages that we see, much more so than the rich do.
But we already discussed that freebies is not favored by at least for families that are facing the worst of this heat wave crisis, those who are living in slum areas, those who do not have access to cooling devices. And now there's no electricity even to run a fan, even to get water. Do you need to then prioritize?
Need to have a sort of you need to have a distribution system that is free from T&D losses. Minimize the T&D losses.
Transmission and distribution losses. Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
We need to have a system where the distribution companies can properly recover the price. Is very important. But whether we should have this priority system built in, artificial, that sometimes becomes counterproductive. That is what we have been doing, prioritizing agriculture, prioritizing this, that. That really doesn't help. Everybody should have access to power.
Mohan, after that. Karthik, first you.
Absolutely. Rationing is never going to get electricity to the poorest consumers, right? Electricity finds its way to those who can pay. If the poorest consumers unfortunately cannot pay, there's no way rationing will actually get them electricity because it's not able to support the poor, right? Rationing is not going to help.
But Manmohan, then, for the time being, what's the plan and the blueprint that the industries have prepared? How do you plan to meet at least the immediate crisis? Partha said in the beginning of the show.
But we expected that during the day, we get continuous power, but that didn't happen. So that was a big setback. If we are told, okay, you have to work 4 days a week, we'll give you full power. And you have to take 3 days off.
The transmission and distribution losses for sure and augment capacity and renewable are a way forward, but not so soon in our near future. So we need to focus on augmenting capacity to meet energy security in India. Thank you, gentlemen. Until we meet next time, it's Namaste from Divina Gupta.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and
Hello there. Numerous severe weather warnings out across North America. The critical fire risk because it's dry and it's windy and it's hot. We've got all that heat ahead of our weather system and much colder air with some late sea in the south. We've got a lot of heat across parts of Europe, which have triggered some intense thunderstorms. That heat stays across Iberia. That thundery rain's moving its way eastwards. And further south, we've got a lot of dry and settled weather continuing, just tempered a little, freshened up across the southern parts of Africa as well. Now, it's been hot and it remains hot for the Middle East, and it's been very dusty. Still quite a bit of dust around, and you saw that wind, that shamal, that will continue to lift the dust. And it's hot as well across India and Pakistan once again, wet in southwestern parts and Sri Lanka. The monsoon windy weather sweeping into the west of Australia, but probably the major concern is going to be more rain for parts of Queensland and New South Wales. It stays cold and windy and unsettled across New Zealand.
Medicine. These girls are benefiting from a vaccine which is offered routinely in wealthier countries. I first became aware of this new coronavirus in early 2020. This has been such a fast-moving story and was relentless. Hard to overstate just how important this vaccine could be. It was always clear that vaccines would be our route out of the pandemic. So it was a privilege to be able to film the very first volunteers to receive.
This is Joe Biden is in South Korea, his first official trip to Asia as US president, as he aims to strengthen ties with America's regional allies. Rwanda is set to receive the first group of asylum seekers from the UK later. Hello and welcome to BBC World News. Russian forces in eastern Ukraine have pushed forward and taken some ground. That's a Russian soldier to be accused of war crimes in Ukraine is continuing in Kiev. The lawyer acting for 21-year-old Vadim Shishimarin, who has admitted shooting an unarmed civilian, says he is not guilty of a premeditated war crime. James Waterhouse has...
Once again, Shishimarin apologised, telling the court, "I sincerely repent. At that moment, I was very nervous." More war crime trials will follow, but President Zelensky doesn't want to stop here, making small advances in the east. In the Luhansk region, the Ukrainians continue to defend and frustrate. Their extraordinary resistance is both down to their resolve and soon the city of Mariupol is finally lost. Almost 2,000 fighters are thought to have surrendered so far, to a fate which could include a war crimes trial of Russia's own. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Kiev.
Camps, essentially. Now, what we understand now is that the leaders have come out, and I think so therefore we can say that finally the resistance is over. The next question is what happens to them. There had been initially a suggestion that this was going to be a prisoner exchange, that they were going to go, and all of this is speculation at this point, I should say. It could be that we see some of the fighters from Azovstal being treated one way and others being treated in a very different fashion.
And just so we are clear, what does this mean in terms of the fall?
Basically, the fall of Mariupol is now complete, and I mean, to all intents and purposes, it had fallen a few weeks ago. The only thing that meant that we would say it hadn't fully fallen was the fact that they had to keep troops pinned in place there by this resistance.
In Lviv, thank you for your time. The United States is putting increasing pressure on the British government to resolve its disputes with the European Union over Northern Ireland trade. A senior official at the State Department said the row risked undermining Western Ireland Protocol, undermines the Good Friday Agreement, and people who can't see that really shouldn't be commenting. US support is really important, but it's got to be based on the understanding of realities, he added. A senior US official in that interview joins me now. What more do you have to say on this matter?
What's really interesting is that you've got Nancy Pelosi from the US Congress and other congressional members coming to the UK in the coming days, and their message is the European Union to be at odds over a trade issue involving Northern Ireland. So in other words, he's not going to the heart of the issue and saying, look, there are concerns, which are the other wider concerns, that this might have an impact on, just businesses, it might have an impact on the President Putin of Russia is looking for any opportunity for a fraying of the Western alliance. And this is potentially one of those. So he's saying, and with the full force of the United States, don't do this. Calm it down. Lower the temperature.
Why it matters to them, but on paper seems quite distant from where they actually are.
The US has been involved in the peace process in Northern Ireland for years. It's seen by some as a guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement, and the US certainly and is both in terms of the munitions that it's sending to Ukraine, but also the money. Yesterday, Congress agreed $40 billion. I mean, that is bigger than most countries' defence budgets, their aid budgets, and that is all going to Ukraine.
So much of the future will be written in the Indo-Pacific. That's according to US President Joe Biden, who's arrived in South Korea on the first stage of his visit to the region. American presidents have long talked of a pivot to Asia in a bid to counter the growing influence.
This vibrant democracy has become a powerhouse of global innovation by investing in educating its people. And companies like Samsung that are driven by responsible development of technology and innovation to invest in one another, to deepen our business ties, to bring our people even closer together.
Well, let's take a moment to look at the agenda for Mr. Biden's trip, which comes as the US faces growing influence in the region, by asking him about President Biden's agenda for the visit.
There's a number of issues that's going to be covered, but I think what comes to the mind is the economic piece of it, because we're going to get the announcement of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. But of course, that's linked to the 7th nuclear test even during this trip. Although I think because of the Omicron COVID-19 virus spreading in North Korea, that may give the North Koreans some pause before they decide to go ahead with another nuclear site. So many people know that South Korea is the 10th largest economy, but as you mentioned, they're also the 10th largest spender on defense. And so South Korea's military capabilities are sizable. And I think with South Korea's willingness to join, then Korea certainly brings something to that table.
And Andrew, just developing on that, turning this on its head, you know, President Yoon has only been in power 11 days, and here he has a US president landing on his doorstep. What does the US visit?
A regional conversation, but because the Yoon government has been stating over and over since its campaign that they want to become more active, that they want to strengthen their alliance relationship with the US, I think the Biden administration is recognizing this and wants to recognize it.
Wallonia, a way of life where creation thrives. Continuously striving for balance in a circular green economy. Wallonia, the land of sustainable innovation.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable.
Hello, this is BBC World News, and these are your latest headlines. Russian forces intensify their offensive in Donbass and gain some ground. President Zelensky says conditions there are hell. Joe Biden is in South Korea.
Who is going on air to cover their faces, and for many, covering this order meant that the women should wear the traditional burqa, but they have not done that. Instead, they came up with creative ideas around this, which means they started wearing the mask, which they were already doing it because of COVID-19, to make it more normal. And some women decided not to wear any mask or face covering, and with many female and male singers and talents, female TV presenters, and everything was normal. And of course, from that society, that civil society, you cannot change that society overnight by such orders. There's some freedom, and these female presenters on air basically were relatively trying to operate as normal. So that's why the Taliban, when they say many people look up to these female presenters, you're going to follow these female presenters. And what these female presenters are going to do in front of camera is going to be significant, because it could be seen as if they are opposing against the Taliban order, or it is going to be seen as if they are...
Small boats from France. 8,500 people have already made the journey this year. Legal challenges mean it's unclear when any flights to Rwanda might depart, but the Rwandan government says it expects to receive the first 50 people from the UK at the
chosen destination for migrants, but not their destination of choice. This is Rouge by Desir, one of the hotels in Kigali that's to be leased for migrants. Jackie Uwamungu, the operations manager, doesn't know.
It is known as the land of 1,000 hills. But to most people, they know Rwanda as a place where a genocide took place in 1994. But since then, the country has enjoyed steady economic growth, and there has been some...
Regards to refugees. This is a country that has abused refugees in its own country.
Allegations the government denies.
There's nothing wrong with Rwandan human right record, no matter what these external organizations of their own. We consider ourselves a country of migration.
To illustrate that, we were invited to a transit camp, a 90-minute drive south of Kigali. It's run by the UN Refugee Agency. Close to 1,000.
No, just as I told you, I just want to go to Canada. But in Africa, I don't know. I'm not so sure.
Like most migrants, it's to go to a Western country. Rwanda is not where they hope to settle.
Sold. It's one of only 2 Mercedes-Benz 300 Uhlenhaut coupes that were ever built, and it was bought by an unnamed private collector, and the money is being donated to charity. That $143 million.
This is a tropical depression here, a slow-moving one, continues wet. The monsoonal rains having around in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands certainly preceded. They are across Sri Lanka and parts of western and southern India. Very wet here. And again, the heat is with us across Pakistan and northern states of India, where temperatures are still getting up into the high 40s. So it's hot by day. It's been relentless and hot by night over the last couple of months, in fact. Now, further north still, it's cooling somewhat. We've got some rains coming in, as you can see, and that'll behind it. As you can see, across southern and western states into Sri Lanka, through the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and through Myanmar. And then still, all not as intense as it has been up towards Assam and the northeast states. It's still a very showery looking picture, actually, for the coming few days. So you can see those showers around it.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine.
वही स्वाद नया अंदाज अमूल चीज ये मेरा चीज है
And correspondents covering both home and global events
get a deeper understanding and find out what is really going on.
BBC World News America.
Many see leaving as their only option. And now the island is experiencing its biggest exodus of young people since the Cold War. That's full coverage of Cuba's outward migration here on BBC World News.
In regions of Donbass and Luhansk, President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Donbass has been completely destroyed and that life there was hell. The United States is putting increasing pressure on the British government to resolve its dispute with the European Union over the Northern Ireland.
Now on BBC World News, veteran World Affairs editor John Simpson talks to BBC correspondents, going beyond the headline.
For Unspun World, the programme where we get straight answers from the BBC's remarkable range of experts right around the globe. In this programme, more and more governments are starting to think that Ukraine may actually
by ourselves, which will be a huge embarrassment to the government.
And should we learn to love the black holes, which we're just starting to photograph in the depths of the universe?
It raises questions about ourselves.
Fled from their homes in fear of what might happen. More than half of that number, 3.25 million, went to Poland. Among them was Marta Shokolo of the BBC's Ukraine.
Russia, our colleagues, they're saying that they feel that Ukraine is winning. But the problem is nobody knows how this win will look like and when it's going to happen. After Eurovision, we won Eurovision, and there were many jokes on the internet, people saying, okay, so the next year Eurovision will be in Crimea. And so people kind of expect that to happen.
A chance of clinging on to any of Ukraine's territory.
I think there is a feeling in society that Ukraine does not need to do any peace talks, peace deals with Russia, which for now it doesn't look very likely, but maybe in a couple of months it will be something that the only option that we all have, because the war is really...
Talked to a lot of people there. What did you feel was the mood of people who are there?
The moment you enter Ukraine, you just can feel the war almost with your skin. Like you see the empty petrol station, and you just realize there are businesses who don't see their families because they are abroad, they don't see their children, and it made me really sad. Now Ukraine is a bit like a big wounded animal. It is. I really lack words for expressing my gratitude to what they've done for us. Sometimes when I walk around Warsaw now, I have feeling that I'm home, and a person is from Ukraine.
Finland and Sweden have been staunchly neutral for a long time. Finland since the end of the Second World War, Sweden for 200 years.
Of NATO was always perceived as a threat in Russia. But right after Finland and Sweden said that we are going to join NATO, Russia changed its line. Finland and Sweden joining NATO is not a threat. A threat would be a new military.
The border between Finland and Russia. I was there a few weeks ago. Often in many places it was scarcely marked. Do you think it's going to be more clearly defined from now on?
It will not be just border between NATO, and I know that many Russians from the areas near the Finnish border, they simply go to Finland because they have families there. They get married, they have kids. They also go there as tourists. They buy flats, they buy summer houses.
Do you think?
I wouldn't say that Kremlin sees this as a betrayal, because this was something that Kremlin probably expected, as it was mentioned by Russian.
And what will be the future relationship? Does everything depend on what happens in the Ukraine war, or is it wider than that?
Well, I think that something that actions between Finns and Russian and people will keep going abroad for groceries. But if Russia starts using its propaganda and kind of tries to make Finnish people look very anti-Russian, then things Finland, but there is an option. On the political level, yes, probably many things depend on Ukraine. But I wouldn't say that Russia at this moment would dare to start a new war, let's say, with Finland. So a new war would be totally insane, even for Kremlin.
When Britain voted to leave the European Union 6 years ago, there were plenty of warnings. The Northern Ireland Protocol, negotiated with the European Union, certainly has introduced controls on all sorts of goods from Britain to Northern Ireland. It's all immensely complicated. But I ask
unionist parties who define themselves by wanting to maintain Northern Ireland's place in the UK, Irish nationalist parties whose real aim is ultimately to merge Northern Ireland into the Republic of Ireland. That means, in essence, it is moving Northern Ireland just that little bit closer to Dublin, into the all-island economy.
Would you think that in, say, 20 years' time, Northern Ireland
is now the largest party in the Assembly, and that's the first time a nationalist party has ever done that. It's still the case, if you look at the broader picture, there are more unionist politicians elected to the Assembly than nationalists. So the British government...
when I used to report, do your job really, back in the 1970s.
Yes, it certainly is a place transformed, and I mean, compared to the place that I grew up in, it is remarkably different, the city of poverty. So the fact that political debate has moved more onto those areas, I think, shows you how much things have moved on from the conflict. On the other hand, many people will also point to the basic divisions that still exist. There is always still, that's get very unpredictable indeed.
For 2 years, North Korea, reclusive, battened down, utterly controlled, denied that it had suffered in any way from BBC's Korean service for enlightenment.
The situation in North Korea is expected to be very dire, and they can no longer hold off saying that we don't have any COVID cases. So in a way, it could be a sign to the international community.
Notable for refusing help from outside for all sorts of other things, hasn't he? I mean, is he going to be forced this time to say, okay, please help us?
We don't know that yet. And in the past, North Korea has been...
How serious is this for North Korea, for Kim Jong-un's leadership?
It will be very serious and quite detrimental, and you could actually link this to the continued missile tests that North Korea has been doing. Just last week we have...
And is probably going to be desperate for outside help. At the same time, he's carrying out missile tests, he's doing everything that seems so hostile.
Actually, this missile launches and potential news, they're very leverage in the international community, and it has been proven in a way successful.
One of the arguments that you sometimes hear in Ukraine at the moment is that the country should never have given up its nuclear weapons.
Actually, a lot of analysts are thinking that they will resume their 5th nuclear test in Punggye site, and that is quite significant, and I don't think the direction will change in any short term.
Palap Ghosh to explain.
A black hole is a dead star that's collapsed, and the gravity gradually builds up so strong that not even light can escape it, and it sucks everything in. So how on earth can you take a picture of something and their combined power was effectively an observatory that's the size of the entire Earth? And so they tune into the black hole, each telescope gets a little bit of it, and they put it together like a gigantic jigsaw puzzle. He was talking nonsense and was discouraged by the astronomical community, but he was quite stubborn about it. And I read about his idea about 20 years ago in a trade mag, and I thought initially that the reporter pressing because he wasn't allowed to talk about it came out.
Tell me, where will we take this next?
It wasn't fairly recently that we knew that black holes really existed. And it's the first proof that we've got that there really is a black hole at the centre of our galaxy. You can compare the theory with the thing. And that's when science really takes off. So this idea that all galaxies have black holes at the centre can be tested, that essentially giant black holes are the glue that holds the same scenario for gravity.
But we are starting to see visual images, aren't we, now, of things that we never thought to see. I mean, quite early stages in the universe's existence.
Well, so this was a kind of let there be light moment.
It sounds almost, as you say, rather a religious kind of experience.
Well, astronomy is, a science, and you see the universe and our place in it. And meanwhile, down here on Earth, we're still showing how primitive we basically are. It's 3 months since President Putin invaded Ukraine, and though tens of thousands of people
छाए हैं हम ही ऐसी कूल है अपनी कहानी चलने दे बस दिल की मनमानी I'm cool, chill your dill. I'm cool, chill your dill. I'm cool, chill your dill.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
Country.
This attack happened while the Secretary General of the United Nations was in Kyiv.
But once again, it's civilians who are the casualties.
There's still no sign that the Kremlin's forces are about to deliver some knockout blow.
See the headlines as they happen with breaking news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.
Being at the heart of a live news show is challenging. So when events move quickly, you need to make sure you have the facts. And in real time. I feel like we're doing a job that matters.